The sun started humming on a Tuesday, and by Friday half the planet had walked out of their front doors and never come back. Shelton Reyes was in the basement when it began. He always said later that the basement saved him, but the truth was simpler than that. He was fixing a water heater for a woman 3 streets over who couldn't pay him, and the concrete walls were thick enough to dull the first note. By the time he climbed back up the stairs, wiping grease on the leg of his coveralls, his wife Maggie was standing at the kitchen window, with both hands pressed flat against the glass. The cat was on the counter, which she never allowed. The kettle was screaming. Maggie wasn't moving. He said her name twice before she turned her head, and even then she only turned it part of the way, like a doll someone had set down wrong. "There's music outside," she said. He listened. He heard the kettle, the cat, the refrigerator, the low hush of a furnace cycling on. He heard nothing else. "It's beautiful, Shell." He turned the kettle off. He picked the cat up off the counter and set her on the floor, and the cat hissed at the window the way a cat hisses at a dog. That was the first thing that scared him, not Maggie's face, the cat. Outside, the sky over Tulsa was the wrong color. Not red, not orange, not any of the colors a sky was allowed to be at 4 in the afternoon. It was a kind of low, warm gold, like a porch light seen through a screen door, and it was coming from everywhere at once. He pulled Maggie back from the window. She let him do it the way a tired child lets you do it. He locked the front door. He locked the back door. He drew every curtain in the house and turned on every lamp inside it. Because some part of him already understood, even then, that the light from outside was not light. It was something pretending. By 6 o'clock the radio was saying solar anomaly. By 8 it was saying the word event. By 10 it was saying nothing at all, because the man reading the news had walked out of the studio mid-sentence and never come back, and there was nobody left at the station who hadn't already walked out before him. Maggie slept against Shell's shoulder on the basement couch, and her breathing was wrong, slow and even and too deep, and every few minutes her lips moved without sound, like she was answering somebody he couldn't see. He didn't sleep. He sat there with his hand on the back of her neck, where the small soft hairs were, where he had put his hand 1,000 times in 22 years, and he listened for the thing his wife could hear and he could not. He did not know yet that he was the lucky one. He did not know yet that across the whole turning earth, in every freesea and every village and every farmhouse with a porch light, the people who couldn't hear the music were already the rarest thing left alive. He just sat there in the basement with his wife and his cat, and somewhere very far above the roof of his house, a thing that was not the sun shone down on Oklahoma, and sang. The first day after, Shell did what he had always done when he didn't know what to do. He made coffee. He made it strong because Maggie liked it weak, and he wanted her to complain. She didn't complain. She drank it the way you drink water when you're not thirsty, looking past the cup at the curtained window, her mouth moving slightly between sips. He talked the whole time. He talked about the water heater he'd been fixing. He talked about his brother Eli in Kansas City, who he hadn't called in 3 months, and was going to call today for sure. He talked about the cat, who was named Doris, after Maggie's mother, which Maggie's mother had never forgiven them for. He talked because the silence in the house was not really silence anymore. The silence had begun to have a shape, and the shape was the song, even though he couldn't hear it. He could feel where it was. He could feel where it pressed against the windows. Maggie said, in the middle of his sentence about Doris and Maggie's mother, "It wants me to come outside." He put the coffee cup down. He took her hands. They were cool, the way her hands always were in the morning. He looked at her face, really looked at it, and he saw something he had never seen there before. It was not fear and it was not love. It was a kind of patient waiting, the way a passenger waits at a gate, sure of the flight, sure of the destination, sure that the only thing in the way of going is the small inconvenience of being made to stay. "Maggie," he said. "I'm not going to," she said. "I know I'm not supposed to. But it wants me to. I just thought you should know." He nodded, because he didn't trust his throat to make a word. She squeezed his hands. "It's so nice, Shell. You can't hear how nice it is. It says nobody's angry anymore. It says nobody has to be tired." "I'm not tired," he said. She smiled at him then, a small private smile that was entirely Maggie. The smile she gave him from across crowded rooms. The smile that said, "You and me, dumbass, the two of us against the whole stupid world." And for one impossible second he thought maybe it was going to be okay. Maybe she was strong enough. Maybe whatever this was, his wife was bigger than it. Then her smile didn't quite stop. It stretched a little too long. Her eyes went past him to the window again, and her lips moved, and she said, almost dreamy, But it's so nice, Shell. He held her hands tighter and he kept talking, because as long as he was talking, she had something to listen to that was not the song. He talked all day. He talked until his voice broke. By sundown his throat felt like he'd swallowed a fistful of gravel. And Maggie was still next to him, still here, still holding his hand in the kitchen with the curtains drawn, and he counted that a victory. He marked it on the wall behind the fridge with a carpenter's pencil. One vertical line. Day 1. That night the power went out. The lamps shrank to nothing, and the refrigerator died with a long sigh, and in the dark Shell could finally see what was outside. Because outside there was no dark anymore. The window edges glowed warm gold around the curtains, the same color the sky had been the first afternoon. Only deeper now, the color of a furnace seen through a crack in a door. He stood in his living room and watched the seam of light around his curtains and understood. With the kind of clean, cold certainty he hadn't felt since the day his father died. That the thing outside had not gone away in the night. It had only gotten patient. Down the street a screen door slammed, then another, then somewhere far off a third. He went to the front window and parted the curtain a half-inch with one finger, and he looked out at his street. His neighbors were walking. They were walking out of their houses in their pajamas, and their bathrobes and their work shirts and their nightgowns. And they were walking down the middles of their lawns, and across the sidewalks and into the road. And they were all walking in the same direction, and they were not in a hurry. They were not afraid. They were walking the way you walk to a porch you have been invited to. Mrs. Halloran from 2 doors down was barefoot. The Patel boy, who was 9, was holding his father's hand. Old man Briggs, who had not walked unassisted in 2 years, was walking unassisted. He had left his walker on his porch. He was smiling. They were going east. They were all going east, toward whatever was waiting east. And Cecil stood at his window with his fingertip, pressing the curtain open a half-inch. And he understood that the song was not asking anymore. The song had been asking on day 1. On day 2, the song was telling. He let the curtain fall. He turned around. Maggie was standing in the kitchen doorway in her sock feet. She was looking past him at the window. Her hand was on the doorframe. "Shell," she said softly. "No," he said. "It's almost time." "No. It's nice, Shell." He crossed the room and he took her by the shoulders and he turned her away from the window. And he walked her down into the basement and he sat her on the couch. And he did the thing he had been telling himself for 30 hours he would never have to do. He took the length of nylon rope off the workbench. He tied his wife's wrists to the leg of the couch, loose enough that her hands could move, tight enough that she could not stand up and walk. She watched him do it. She did not fight. When he finished, she looked up at him, with her face wet, and she said in her own voice, her real voice, "Thank you." He sat on the floor in front of her and put his head against her knee, and he cried for the first time since his father died, and her tied hands stroked the top of his hair very lightly, the way she had stroked it 10,000 times, and outside the song kept singing, and his neighbors kept walking, and the sky was the color of a porch light, and somewhere far above all of it, a thing that was not the sun was waiting for them all to come. He marked the wall behind the fridge in the dark. Day 2. On day 4 he understood it was not the sun. He understood it because the radio in his truck, which still ran on a battery, still picked up a single station out of Albuquerque, where a woman with a voice like cold gravel was reading from a piece of paper. She was a physicist. She had been a physicist. She kept saying that, like she wasn't sure anymore. She said the solar output had not changed. She said the spectrographs were clean. She said whatever was making people walk was not coming from the sun. It was coming through the sun. It was using the sun the way a hand uses a glass to throw a voice into a room. It is not light, she said. I want everyone listening to understand that. It is not light, and it is not heat, and it is not radiation in any sense we have a name for. It is a carrier. The sun is being made to carry something. She paused. He could hear her breathing. Something is using our star to speak to us, she said. And we are not the ones it is speaking to. We are what it is speaking through. He sat in his truck with the door closed and the radio turned low, and he watched the gold light through the windshield, and he understood. He was not standing under a sky. He was standing under a mouth. The thing above was not a god and it was not a phenomenon. It was a someone. It was a someone who had figured out how to use a star the way a man uses a megaphone. And what it was saying, through the warm, patient, golden light that had filled his neighbor's eyes and walked them barefoot down the road, was simple. It was the same thing every conqueror in human history had said in every human language. Come outside. We're going to be one big happy family now. He turned the radio off. He sat there with his hands on the wheel. He thought about Eli in Kansas City. He thought about his brother's voice on a phone that didn't work anymore, in a city he could not drive to because every road would take him east. He thought about the Patel boy holding his father's hand. He thought about his wife on the basement couch, with rope on her wrists. He thought, very clearly, you picked the wrong species. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't have to. He felt it land in him the way a nail lands in wood, square and final. And he sat there in the cab of his truck under the wrong-colored sky, and he made the small private decision that would, in the days to come, save what was left of the world. He decided he was not going outside. And he decided that if a thing big enough to play a star like a flute wanted him to, then that thing was by exactly that much going to lose. Day 6, the woman from Albuquerque was still on the radio. There were others now. A man in Reykjavik, a teenager in Sao Paulo whose voice cracked between sentences, a monk in Bhutan who only spoke for 90 seconds at a time and then went silent for hours. They had found each other. They were the deaf ones, was how the woman in Albuquerque put it. Even though their ears worked fine, the song didn't reach them. Nobody knew why. The teenager in Sao Paulo had a theory. He said the song moved on a frequency that needed a particular protein in the inner ear to bind to, and that some people, maybe 1 in 50,000, were born without it. He said it the way teenagers say things, half certain, half hopeful. The woman in Albuquerque said maybe. The monk said nothing. Shell didn't care about the protein. Shell cared about the woman tied to the couch in his basement, who had not eaten in 2 days because she would not open her mouth for him anymore, because her mouth was busy with the song. He cared about the cat, Doris, who had stopped eating on day 3 and had crawled under the basement stairs and was breathing very slow and would not come out, and who he understood was going to die soon, and who was, he had begun to suspect, the second living thing in his house that could not hear the song. He did not know why. He just knew that the cat had hissed at the window on day 1, and the cat had not gone to the window since. He fed the cat with a syringe of water and tuna oil. He fed his wife the same way, drop by drop, while she turned her head away, and her lips moved in answer to a voice he could not hear. On day 7, he tried something. He had been thinking about it for a day and a half. He had been thinking about it since the woman in Albuquerque said the word carrier. A carrier is a thing that brings a thing. A carrier can be jammed. A carrier can be drowned out. Any radio man knows that. Any kid with 2 tin cans and a string knows that. You don't have to be louder than the signal forever. You only have to be louder than the signal here, in this room, around this one ear, for one small stubborn second. He went down into the basement with his guitar. He hadn't played in 11 years. The strings were dead. He tuned it by feel and ear, because the tuner needed batteries he didn't have. And he sat on the floor in front of his wife, and he started to play the only song he could remember all the way through, which was a lullaby Maggie's mother used to sing to Maggie when Maggie was small, a lullaby in Spanish that Maggie had taught him on their second date in a diner in Tulsa 23 years ago, sitting across from him in a vinyl booth, laughing because he could not roll his R's. He played it badly, he sang it worse. He sang it in his cracked sandpaper voice with his cracked knuckle hands on a guitar that had not been touched since his mother died. And his pitch was wrong, and his Spanish was worse. And Maggie's head very slowly turned toward him. Her lips, which had been moving in answer to the song, stopped. She looked at him. He kept playing. She blinked. Her eyes filled. She said in her own voice, the small, ordinary voice of his wife of 22 years, "Shell, I'm so hungry." He set the guitar down. He went upstairs. He came back with a bowl of cold canned soup and a spoon, and he fed it to her 1 spoonful at a time, and she ate. She ate the whole bowl. Halfway through, she started crying and could not stop, but she kept eating, because she was Maggie, and because she was hungry, and because for the first time in 7 days the song had been, in this one small basement, around this one ear, drowned out by something else. Something specifically, stupidly, stubbornly human. A bad lullaby sung off-key by a man who loved her. He marked the wall, day 7, the first victory of the war. He got on the radio that night. The truck battery was almost dead, but he turned it on long enough to find the Albuquerque woman, and he keyed the mic, and he said, "This is Shelton Reyes in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I have a question for the kid in Brazil." There was a long pause. The woman in Albuquerque came back on, and her voice was different than the voice she used to read from her paper. It was the voice of a woman who had not heard her own name from a stranger in 7 days. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "go ahead. He said the song needs a protein to bind to, in the ear. Is that right?" "That's his theory." If you sing something else, loud, close, into the ear of somebody who's gone, does the song let go? There was a longer pause. He heard her breathing. He heard her say, away from the mic. Oh, he heard her say it again. Then she came back on. Mr. Reyes, she said carefully. Why are you asking? Because my wife was gone this morning, he said. And she ate her soup tonight, and I want to know if I just got lucky, or if I just figured something out. The woman in Albuquerque did not answer for a long time. When she came back on, her voice was very even, the kind of even that is doing a lot of work to be even. Mr. Reyes, she said, please stay on this frequency. I am going to wake some people up. By morning there were 40 of them on the radio. By the afternoon of day 8 there were 200. Deaf ones, all of them, scattered across a planet that had mostly walked east. They were in basements, and in root cellars, and in the back rooms of churches, and in the holds of fishing boats, and in one case in the bottom of an empty swimming pool in Arizona. They were the ones the song had missed. And they were, every one of them, sitting next to a husband, a daughter, a grandmother, a friend who the song had not. The woman in Albuquerque organized it the way you would organize anything, which was badly, because nobody had ever organized anything like this before. She told them to try. She told them to sing. She told them anything specific, anything small, anything that belonged to the person they were trying to bring back. Not anthems. Not hymns. Lullabies, limericks, inside jokes. The thing the person used to hum while shaving. The song from the radio the year they fell in love. The bedtime story, told in the bedtime voice. The smaller and stupider and more particular, the better. The song outside was vast and clean and beautiful, and the same for everyone. The only thing that could cut through it was the opposite of that. The only thing that could cut through it was the specific human noise that belonged to one person and one person only. A grandmother in Manila sang a sea shanty her grandson had made up when he was 4. A welder in Glasgow recited the starting lineup of the 1985 Aberdeen squad to his father. The monk in Bhutan, who had been silent for most of a week, began at last to speak, and what he was doing on his end was naming, one by one, every dog his abbot had ever owned. Shell played the lullaby again, and again, and again, and on the 4th day of playing it, Maggie was strong enough to walk upstairs with him, and to sit at the kitchen table with the curtain drawn, and to eat real food, and to say his name. She still heard the song. She said so. She said it was always there, under everything, the way a refrigerator is always there. But she could hold it at arm's length now. She could choose. And that, the woman in Albuquerque said on the radio the next night, was the second great human discovery of the war. The first had been that the song could be drowned out. The second was that, once it had been drowned out, the person could learn to drown it out themselves. By day 12, there were 1,000 of them. By day 20, 10,000. By the end of the first month, no one was counting anymore, because every freed mind became a singer, and every singer became a teacher, and every teacher fanned out across a continent of people who had walked into the woods and the fields and the long quiet roads heading east, sat down at last in clearings under the gold light, and stopped, because they were tired, because nothing was waiting for them at the end of east, because the thing above had not actually built a place for them to arrive. It had only built a road. The deaf ones walked among them with guitars and harmonicas and dog-eared photographs and old phones full of voicemails from before. They sat down in front of strangers and they sang the strangers' children's names. They sang the songs strangers' mothers had sung. They reached into the catalog of a stranger's particular life, and they pulled out the one specific noise that belonged to that stranger only, and they offered it, and 100 times out of 100, the song above did not have an answer for that. Because the song above did not know. The song above only knew the shape of a species. It did not know the shape of a person. Shell took his first trip out on day 31. He left Maggie at the kitchen table with a fresh battery in the radio and a list of names pinned to the wall, and he kissed the top of her head twice, once for going and once for coming back, and he drove east out of Tulsa for the first time since the gold light came down. The road east was the worst thing he had ever seen, and he had seen in his life as a man who fixed broken houses, a lot of bad things. There were shoes on the shoulder, miles of shoes. Single shoes mostly, the way shoes come off when you walk too long in them and don't notice. There were coats folded on guardrails like the people who'd worn them had simply gotten warm and put them down. There were cars angled into ditches with the doors hanging open, and there were grocery bags tumbling in the wind where somebody had walked out of a Walmart parking lot, mid-errand, and just kept going. There were no bodies, because the people had not died. The people had walked. The people were still walking, or were sitting now, in clearings and in fields, and along the long flat shoulder of the interstate, where the song had finally told them they had gone far enough. He passed 1,000 of them before he stopped for the first one on his list. Her name was Carol Went. Her granddaughter Lila had been on the radio out of Wichita, voice thin and high, reading from a notebook the things her grandmother used to say. Carol was 68. Carol made coffee cake every Sunday. Carol called everybody honey, including the mailman, who she had a complicated grudge against. Carol had a song she used to sing when she was vacuuming, which was not really a song, which was a tune she made up while she was vacuuming. That went and Lila had hummed it into the radio for 90 seconds straight, crying the whole time, while Shell wrote the notes down on a napkin. He found Carol in a field outside Joplin, sitting on the grass with her hands folded in her lap. Her feet were bare and cut. Her hair, which Lila had said she always wore in a low bun with a tortoise-shell clip, was loose around her shoulders. The clip was gone. Carol was looking up at the gold sky with the patient waiting face he had seen on Maggie on day 2, and her lips were moving without sound. He sat down across from her in the grass. He took the napkin out of his pocket. He cleared his throat. He said, "Carol, honey, your granddaughter Lila says you owe her coffee cake." He hummed the vacuuming tune. He did it badly, because he hadn't learned it, just memorized the shape of it from a thin crying voice on a radio. He got it wrong twice and started over. He did not feel ridiculous. He had stopped feeling ridiculous in week 2 of his marriage to a woman tied to a basement couch, and the feeling had not come back. Carol's lips, which had been moving in answer to the song, slowed. He kept humming. He went through the postman grudge. He said her son's name, which was Daniel, and her late husband's name, which was Ray, and the name of her dog from 1987, which was Pickles. He said honey 3 times because Lila had said she said it constantly, and Lila had wanted to hear it again. Carol blinked. Her eyes were still on the sky. Then they were not. Then they were on him. She said very quietly, "Who are you?" He started crying. He had not expected to. He wiped his face with the back of his greasy hand. He said, "I'm a friend of Leela's, ma'am." "Leela," she said. Then she said it again, and the second time it had the right shape, the grandmother shape, the loving, exasperated shape. And Shell knew she had come back the rest of the way. He helped her up. He gave her his water bottle. He gave her his sandwich, which was the only sandwich he had. She ate half and gave the other half back. He drove her 190 miles to a porch in Wichita, where a 15-year-old girl was waiting on the steps with a radio in her lap. And Lila saw the truck, and Lila stood up. And that was the first time Shell understood, the way you understand something in the chest and not the head, what the work was going to be. The work was going to be names. The work was going to be one porch at a time. The work was going to take the rest of his life, and probably the rest of a lot of other people's lives too. And it was going to be, in its own quiet, stubborn, unspectacular way, the best work a person could be given to do. He drove home that night under the gold sky with the radio on low, and the woman in Albuquerque reading out coordinates of clearings where people were sitting, and he understood, somewhere east of Tulsa with his hands on the wheel, that the war was not going to be won in a day or a month or a year. The war was going to be won the way a house is built, one nail at a time, one name at a time, and humanity, which had built houses one nail at a time for 100,000 years, was, as it turned out, very good at this kind of war. It was the only kind of war the thing above did not know how to fight. That Shell understood by the end of the second month was the thing above had gotten wrong. It had been very smart. It had been smart enough to figure out how to play a star. It had been smart enough to find the protein in the human ear, and to write a song the protein could not refuse. It had built a weapon so elegant that, when it deployed, 8 billion people walked out of their front doors and did not look back. But it had built a weapon for a species, and what it had attacked was not a species. It was 8 billion specific people, each of whom had a grandmother, a bedtime song, and a private joke, and a name only one other person in the world said the right way. The weapon had no answer to that, because the weapon had not, in all its elegance, ever once imagined a basement in Tulsa, with a man in coveralls, singing a bad lullaby to the woman he had married in a courthouse in 2003. The weapon had not imagined the woman crying because she was hungry. The weapon had not imagined the cat coming out from under the stairs, 2 days into the singing, and climbing onto the woman's lap, and going to sleep. The weapon, in other words, had not imagined people. It had only imagined humanity, which is a different thing, and a much easier thing to fight. Shell thought about that a lot. In the weeks after, When he was driving Maggie east in his truck with a guitar in the back and a list of names taped to the dash, the names of the people whose families had radioed in to ask for help. He thought about it when he sat down in the dirt in front of a woman who had been walking for 40 days, whose feet were ruined, whose eyes were full of gold, and he opened his battered notebook, and he read out the things her son in Memphis had told him to say. A nickname, a street they'd lived on, the way she used to laugh at her own jokes before the punchline. He thought about it when her eyes cleared, slow, 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 and she said her son's name out loud for the first time in 6 weeks. He thought about it when, by the end of the year, the sky still glowed gold, but nobody walked anymore. He thought about it on the day the woman in Albuquerque came on the radio for the last time and said, very simply, we don't know if it'll come back. We don't know if it ever left. We don't know what it was. But it tried to make us into one big thing, and we said no, one person at a time, until it ran out of moves. She paused. Take care of each other, she said, specifically, by name. Then she went off the air and didn't come back, and somewhere up above Earth the sun went on shining. And whatever had been using it to speak went on speaking, or didn't, and there was no way for anyone alive to know which. Shell went home. The drive back to Tulsa that final time took him 3 days, because the roads were full of porches now, and porches were the new churches. Every town he passed through had set out chairs in front yards and lit lamps in windows. And people who had come back from the gold were sitting in those chairs reading lists of names out loud. The names of the ones still in the fields. The names of the ones not yet found. The names of the ones who had been found and could not be brought back. The third category was small, but it was real. Not everyone could be sung home. Some had walked too long, or too far inward, or had not had anyone left who knew their specific small noises, or had been one of those people, and there had always been some, who had no specific small noises to begin with. Those, the deaf one said quietly, were the saddest. Those were the ones the thing afar above had not really needed to call, because they had been half gone already, and the gold light had only finished what loneliness had started. Shell thought about that a lot. He thought about it every time he drove past a porch and saw a lamp burning in a window for somebody who was never coming home. He stopped in 3 towns on the way back. He sang in 2 of them. He failed in 1. The failure was a man named Harlan, 62, whose son in Detroit had given Shell a list as long as his arm. Fishing trips, an old dog, a wife named Joanna who had died in 1994. And Shell had sat in front of Harlan in a field outside Springfield for 4 hours and sung every item on the list, and Harlan's lips had never stopped moving in answer to the other song. Shell drove away from Springfield with the list folded in his shirt pocket and his hands tight on the wheel, and he did not cry until he was 20 miles down the road, because crying in front of Harlan had felt like the kind of thing a man owed it to Harlan not to do. He would carry Harlan the rest of his life. He understood that. He understood by then that the work came with a price, and the price was the ones you could not bring back, and you paid it by remembering their names, because to forget them would be to let the song above have them after all. And that was the one thing he had decided, on day 6 in his truck under the wrong-colored sky, he was not going to do. Maggie was sitting on the porch when he pulled up, which was a thing she could do now. The cat Doris, who had not died after all, was on her lap. The sky was the color of a porch light, and would be the color of a porch light probably forever. Nobody knew yet whether the gold would fade. Nobody knew yet whether their grandchildren would know what a blue sky looked like. He got out of the truck. He was tired in the marrow of his bones. He had been gone 6 weeks this time, and he had sung to 17 strangers in 17 towns, and 12 of them had come back, and 5 had not, and he carried the 5 with him, the way men carry the names of the ones they couldn't save, which is to say, in a place inside the chest that does not heal, and is not supposed to. Maggie watched him walk up the steps. She did not get up. He sat down next to her. The cat looked at him with the patient irritation of cats. "You're back," Maggie said. "I'm back." She put her head on his shoulder, the way she always had, in the small ordinary way that was hers and his and nobody else's. She said after a while, "Tell me about them." He told her about them. He told her the names. He told her the lullabies, the limericks, the inside jokes, the small specific noises he had carried for 6 weeks across 6 states to put back into the ears of strangers. He told her about the 5 he had not been able to reach. He said the names too, because that was the rule now. You said the names. You said them out loud. You did not let them become a number. The gold light lay over his porch and over his wife, and over his old cat, and over the bad guitar in the back of his truck, and somewhere up above all of it, The thing that had tried to make humanity into one big quiet beautiful thing went on doing whatever it was doing, or did not. Shell did not look up. He had not looked up in a year. He didn't intend to start. He kept his eyes on his wife. He said her name. He said it the way only he had ever said it, with the small soft hitch in the middle that was 22 years old and belonged to nobody else, anywhere, in any star system, on any frequency, ever. Maggie smiled, the cat purred. And in the basement, on the wall behind the fridge, there was a long row of pencil marks that nobody was counting anymore, because the counting had stopped being the point a long time ago. The point now, it turned out, was the singing. The point now was the names. The point now was the small, stubborn human noise that one person makes for one other person in one specific room, which is the noise that, against every reasonable expectation, against every elegant weapon, against every patient golden thing, waiting at the end of every road heading east, had turned out to be the loudest sound in the universe.